actually the notion of the pandemics that can come, the viral storms that are out there is mentioned, obviously well before the current situation we're dealing with. And Paul Stamets, I'd love to ask you, in many ways, this has been your life's work. And can you talk a little bit? I know there are some things that you can say and some things you may not be able to share, but can you talk to us a little bit about this notion of where we stand today? And specifically, there are a lot of questions coming in already around immune support through mushrooms.
Well, thank you. I'm greatly honored to be here for all of you and virtually. And I'm on a remote island in British Columbia. I have a place up here. I like to call this Agarikon Island. There's an agarikon right back there, that rare old growth mushroom, which we discovered to be a potent source of having activity in reducing viruses. My work with Project BioShield directly after 9/11, many of you are aware of that. And so I have focused a lot on the immune-enhancing properties of mushrooms and mushroom mycelium. And I've come to understand very strongly that the mycelial networks influence the immune systems of animals and plants. This has been well authenticated by many other scientists. And knowing that these polypore mushrooms are extremely active at reducing viruses, for instance, in bees, we published in Nature scientific reports. And some of these polypore mushrooms help reduce viruses more than 45,000 to one treatment, 12 days after being treated into honeybees. We did also in vitro work with the Project BioShield, showing that the agarikon mushroom was highly active against bird flu, swine flu, herpes, pox viruses. So I and other researchers have been long predicting a viral storm. And what has been the focus of my research is that I have come to learn and understand very intimately and deeply that when we lose biodiversity, when we deforest and cut down the forests, we're removing the menu of food for these fungal networks. And as they become dismantled, and these networks then are no longer providing the food and the resources and the immune-enhancing compounds for the animals that depend upon them, then zoonotic diseases spread. So many of us have been predicting viral storms for a long time. I have bad news, folks, in a sense that this is the first of many viral storms to come. As we denature nature, viral pandemics will become increasingly common. They're a reflection of the ecosystem becoming sick. And if we have a sick ecosystem, then we are also recipients of disease. And once we exceed the carrying capacity of our ecosystems, it's a rule of nature. Any organ that does so, then zoonotic diseases emanate out and knock that population down. That's what we're seeing right now. But in terms of the coronavirus, to be clear, we have no direct evidence that these polypore mushrooms can reduce coronaviruses. We have very good evidence that these polypore mushrooms support immunity. And with strong immune systems, then you're able to maintain a healthy lifestyle and a healthy state of being. What's happening is a dysregulation of immunity across the landscapes, and supporting microdiversity, biodiversity, forests, and understand that we live as a part of nature, not a part, but within nature, then I think that we can tap into these fungal networks for many of the solutions to the challenges that we face even today. So much of my research, especially in the past 2 or 3 months, have focused on the topics of the day. And we're excited that we're pursuing several research paths right now, but I cannot, and it's not responsible for me to say that these polypore mushrooms can reduce coronaviruses. It is authenticated that these polypore mushrooms do support immunity, and other viral targets that we've looked at have shown efficacy in vitro, and in vivo with bees, but clinical studies with humans have not been done.
Okay, thank you for that, Paul, and thank you for all that you do, and also for the generosity of spirit of sharing so much of your research and so much that's out there. You know, you're like this amazing conduit for knowledge and insight. So we really appreciate that. And Eugenia, you are both in the film and I think in life this bridge between the worlds of science and food and it struck me actually in talking to my partner Marcina that we've created this almost this false delineation between food and medicine, as opposed to to seeing that bridge. And I'm wondering whether you can speak to that. You need to just unmute yourself.
I mean, Hippocrates, he said that let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. So eating well, eating consciously, eating sustainably, eating seasonally, all those acts in terms of your diet ultimately feed into your ability to counteract disease. They support your immune system. They keep you healthy and strong. They support your ecosystem. If you eat seasonally and locally without over impacting your environment by getting foods from far away, foods that are heavily packaged and processed, then you can support your ecosystem, your local environment, and your local economy for that matter. So it's to separate health and food is to, I think, misunderstand health and food.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And this is a question actually for both you, Paul, and Louis, because Paul, you've spent your life with the mushrooms, and Louis, for the last decade plus, you've been immersed in this world as well. And I asked this of both of you because one of the things that we've talked about as this film is being finished and being released into the world is that question, and it may sound like a silly question to some, but the question of what would the mushrooms want? There is this absolute honoring of the intelligence of nature. I think that everybody on the panel holds, and that is imbued in the film. And so I'm going to ask this question, which is, what do you believe the mushrooms would want us to know in this moment in time?
I think for me, it's pretty simple. I feel the mushrooms want us to live in harmony with the planet so that, all life ecosystems can flourish. Get our act together, wake up, listen, and, just be in sync with the energy of life.
And Paul, you just need to unmute.
It's a common thing here. Technology. I had one very powerful psilocybin mushroom experience, and it still resonates in my thoughts. And I think of this experience almost daily. Is that when I had a very high dose of psilocybin mushrooms, I realized, oh my God, we are all one. We are all connected. We are individuals within one giant organism. The concept of Gaia, and other people talk about this, but it's this feeling of self-obvious truth, of interconnectedness, and the fact that we're all part of the same intermolecular connected entity of universal consciousness. And then when I realized that my view of reality has been such a small sliver, and I had been fooled, I'd fooled myself. And what these psilocybin mushrooms have done, it opened up my eye to the universe, and realizing that death and birth are inevitabilities, but it's part of the recycling of matter, and that the voices of nature called out to me to say, wake up, don't you see? You are in such a uniquely cherished position as the ascendant species, but with that, you have a responsibility. What are you going to do? What is your responsibility? How are you going to help this planet beyond your lifetime? You're given a gift of life and a voice and a body. Millions of people have died before us. Billions of people will die after us. But this is our moment in time. Take this responsibility as a cherished opportunity to be able to make a positive difference for the commons. people are, you can't take it with you. It's a legacy that you leave. What is your legacy in the context of nature? And I think it's a call to arms. And that's what we're seeing now. It's a call to arms for everyone on this planet to come together across political borders, boundaries of countries, to realize that we share a universal consciousness together with nature.
Beautifully said, Paul. Thank you for that. Yeah. We're blessed on this panel tonight to have not just one, but two Tonys, and they are both extraordinary human beings. They also happen to both be in New York, which is in New York City, which is right now the epicenter of the COVID-19 virus. They also are a bridge into a lot of what you were talking about, Paul, because there is a great deal of anxiety in this moment in dealing with this, and a recognition that we are all home. Most everybody that is on this call tonight, wherever you are in the world, is on lockdown or some form of quarantine or isolation, certainly social distancing. And I want to turn to you, Tony Bossis. We have had such an extraordinary opportunity to be with you through a number of these Q&As, to see you do grand rounds with this film at Tufts University. And your generosity of spirit is amazing. If you can share with us, first of all, if you can share with us your thoughts from New York City tonight, but then also, if you can bridge us, if you can just mute for 1 second, Tony, if you can then bridge us into a very important aspect of this film is not just about the intelligence of nature, but and the environment, but is about this need for a shift in consciousness. And this is a world that you've been deeply immersed in with patients from many different aspects. And so if you can share your thoughts with us, that would be great.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everyone, for being here. This is humbled. Yeah, so Tony and myself are both in New York City tonight. And yeah, here we are. I'll come back to that in a little bit. But in terms of the research, so I've been really grateful and very lucky since 2009 to be involved with research looking at how psilocybin, the active ingredient from mushrooms, can trigger this incredible state of consciousness in humans, what we call the mystical experience or peak experience, that's been known throughout civilization, throughout history. We're wired for meaning. We're wired for transcendent states of awareness. We're wired to know that we are all connected, that we feel right now. I mean, this virus has let us know in a very dramatic way that we are connected in life and love and in death. We're connected. So we completed a study at NYU that many of you may know about, looking at how this state of awareness, when triggered by psilocybin in one session, can recalibrate and change the way people with advanced cancer and at the end of life, how they view their death, how they view their last days here on this planet, and how they view their remaining days. It's been stunning. I've been lucky enough to work in palliative care for many years, and the hardest part of the field is helping people somehow come to terms with the end of this life. This incredible gift we have, this incredible miracle. What is this? Where are we? How did we get here? It's incredible that we have bodies. And to be in the cusp of losing that is an incredible existential and spiritual and emotional trauma that we all will go through. And our results had shown that with one dose of this medicine in a proper setting, with trained therapists, resulted in people with advanced cancer having incredible experiences. And Tony will speak about these. We witnessed comments about that we're all connected, that everything is connected and interconnected, that consciousness, whatever that is, and we don't know, may survive physical death. Or if I am to die and that's it, that I have profound gratitude for having been here for this one incredible life. I always joke as a scientist, it's not always, it wasn't always easy initially to talk about love all the time, but that's what they tell us. that they experience a profound sense of self-love, love for people in their lives. And what I find extraordinary is patients in our study, many reported this feeling of a larger love, a divine love. I always use the Greek word agape, that consciousness itself, that the cosmos itself may have a ground of being that somehow feels like what we call love. And so we don't die well in America. We don't die well on the planet. But I have profound hope that mushrooms and psilocybin, the active ingredient, can really help us die better. And I hope within 5 to 10 years, we have these medicines rescheduled and centers throughout the country where people can come, have these sessions, and die with acceptance, with dignity, and with a sense of integrity.
And live as well.
Fully, and live fully. You know, real quick on that point, Steve, was a perfect point. When we learn not to fear death so much and to accept our death, then we can learn to live fully. So these patients, these participants were able to live so fully in their remaining days with that fear somehow mitigated or erased by these incredible mystical experiences. So
thank you for your work.
Thank you for your work, Tony.
And I also want to note that that many of the patients in the early studies were in late stage cancer treatments, and that was in part because they were the first patients that anybody was willing to allow you to use these substances with. But we can talk about it later. But it's gone on to include meditators and religious professionals and many other people. But somebody who was in one of the early studies at Johns Hopkins, and I see already tonight in the chat room is getting enormous love. And there was one comment in particular from somebody thanking you for your vulnerability and for sharing your story. And that is Tony Head. Tony, can you share with us a little bit of your experience?
Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody. I'm really enjoying this, and I'm in Brooklyn, New York, and the epicenter. And it's a little hairy right now, but we're all going to pull together and get through it. But my experience came by accident. I was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer at one point, and my oncologist gave me a brochure about this program that had to do with psilocybin, and it sat on my desk actually for a year. I didn't consider it at all, but at some point I picked it up, and then I decided to do it, and it's a very engaging process. It takes about 6 weeks to get evaluated medically. They go back your whole life. They interview you, everything you've ever done, any person you've talked. I mean, it's very, very extensive. And when I finally had the experience, it was unlike anything. It's nothing that I can really describe. It's mystical, so therefore it's very difficult to describe. But I will say this: it did put me in touch with what I believe was a higher power, and it took my breath away when it happened. It's something that I can't remember the experience exactly, but I can remember how powerful it was. And it changed my life in the sense that for some reason, psilocybin opens up a door. This is just my belief, I'm not a scientist, but I think it opens up a door somewhere in your brain, your soul, and it lets you into another area that you normally don't have access to. And in that area, you're able to see, I mean, I felt like I was in an infinite place. Things on earth, my family, all these other things, my job, whatever I was doing, it didn't really matter. The most important thing during that experience was where I was and what I was feeling, and how in touch I was with that. I'll never forget it. And my hope is that, like Tony was saying, that not just for people who are maybe in the last stages of their life, this therapy has a lot of promise for all other kinds of things: addictions, cigarette smoking, alcohol. And the thing about it, you do it once, you have no I mean, I don't want to go out and do it again. I mean, I have, once the phone rings and you answer it, you don't have to keep answering, so to speak. So there's no addiction to it. And it's a wonderful program. I hope everyone out there really moves to get this scientific research going to where it's accessible to other people, because I think it can make a real change in this world.
Hey, Tony, can I just jump in? I just want to ask you a question. I mean, one of my favorite lines in the movie is that, you know, when you lost your fear of dying, you embraced living. And I'm wondering, do you feel there could be a psychological benefit in terms of having that attitude that helped you overcome your cancer?
I think, you know, people have asked me about that, and I have no evidence that of it, but I think there's something to it, because how deep the experience was. I wonder about that, and yeah, I hope it's true. I mean,
I remember Tony, when we were doing a Q and A in Brooklyn, and that question came up actually. And I remember, as you were thinking about that, you said, you know, what was interesting to you was that while the study had nothing to do with psilocybin's effect on your cancer, it struck you that there were so many people who were in that early study that are actually still alive that had late stage cancers. And what you shared was that this idea that it kept the stress down because you were able to focus on what you needed to focus on and not on the fear and the anxiety.
Yes, I think that's true. I mean, I think after the experience, I just looked at life differently.
Yeah.
I wasn't obsessed with dying or death. I was more just looking at life, and really looking at how we as a world, as humanity, connect.
Yeah.
And I thought about it, and I thought that the most important thing in this world is that if we can make a difference doing that, I mean, that's the most important thing that we could ever do. So I got away from focusing on me, and more so just focus on living.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a very profound moment during that evening that I want to bring you back to. And in doing it, I want to also recognize that the groundbreaking work that's going on at places like NYU and Johns Hopkins and UCLA and Imperial College and so many other places around the world is really a reclaiming of many of these psychedelic substances that had a rich lineage, many from indigenous cultures. And the recognition of that is very important. Now, there was a man who spoke during the Q and A in Brooklyn, and he spoke of his wife, who had tried very hard to get into one of the studies, but because of some small pre-existing condition, she wasn't able to get in. And he shared that she had passed away without having access to that medicine. And I want to turn to you, Tony Bossis, to give us a sense of where things stand right now in terms of the legalization of these substances.
Yeah, thank you, Tony, for your words. Thanks for the shout out. I'm not sure if it was intentional or not. You paraphrased Alan Watts with the great line, "Once you get the message, you hang up the phone." So, you know, it's important to look back, and Stephen, thank you for reminding the audience that these medicines, this research goes back to the 1950s, and even a bit earlier, to the 40s, when Albert Hofmann had discovered LSD, which is a sister medicine. The two main indications to grow out of the first wave of research, which was a remarkable time, was with people who were dying of cancer and with people who were alcoholics. Now we see a really wide net being thrown in terms of lots of applications these medicines have: PTSD, smoking cessation. And so it's remarkable, all the various forms of suffering we're able to think we could treat through these clinical trials. But I really want to, highlight that for me and for so many people, to die better and to ease that anxiety is such a remarkable avenue for this research. In terms of where we're going, We're still in clinical trials with psilocybin and palliative care and their cancer-related anxiety. It's all a bit of speculation, but I think it's fair to say that within between 5 and 10 years, hopefully much less. I don't want to overshoot it. That the FDA will reschedule these medicines for various clinical applications. So, in other words, for end-of-life distress or for addiction. So, we're certainly hoping that in the time coming, with repeated trials, repeated confirmation of safety and efficacy, that psilocybin is indeed available for people who have anxiety and depression and angst secondary to having a very serious illness. We're not there yet, and it behooves everyone to, us researchers are really doing a very careful job at respecting this incredible medicine and then the lineage they come from, both in the research and throughout history. Again, it's not about the drug per se. The psilocybin generates an incredible state of awareness that Tony spoke about beautifully. It opens, seemingly for a temporary period of time, the gates of consciousness, where we have access to much more of whatever this all is. And with that comes insight and wisdom. But those experiences happen also naturally throughout time. They form the foundations of the major religions. They occur naturally. There was a recent Pew study, 49% of Americans reported naturally occurring peak experiences. But in proper settings, these medicines can generate it in a very robust way. So it's about the medicine triggering what's part of who we are.
Yeah.
Who we are.
Yeah. And I want to say that the research that you referred to that goes back to the 50s and the 60s is in the medical realm. And of course, many of these substances have a lineage that goes way back, for hundreds and if not thousands of years in sacred traditions. And I also want to recognize that while the medical model is moving forward through this process and with very important work, there also is a grassroots movement that has formed in this country and in other countries around the world around decriminalization. In our country, it began in Denver with the decriminalization of psilocybin, and then has moved to decriminalization of nature of all entheogenic plants in places like Oakland and Santa Cruz. Oregon has an initiative in front of it, and I think hundreds of cities right now are looking at the same thing. But one of the questions that comes up that I'd like to direct to you, Paul, is many of these studies are being done with a synthesized psilocybin molecule. And one of the questions that is coming up for many people is the efficacy of what is found in nature as well. And if you can speak to that, that would be great. Paul.
Well, from a medical and science point of view, having a single molecule that you can test clinically reduces the number of variables, so you can make a conclusion on the data that's unfettered by other confounders. That state of thinking in the medical science, even though it's conventional, is rapidly changing. The entourage effect of other molecules, in this case associated with psilocybin and psilocin, baeocystin, norobaeocystin, and other psilocybin analogs, we know cause neurogenesis. Our recent research that we have done using pluripotent stem cells of psilocybin analogs, which are perfectly legal, shows tremendous neurogenesis, outgrowth of neurons. These are human brain neurons grown in vitro, but using the same sort of tests that are used for pre-Alzheimer's or for drugs being approved for Alzheimer's treatments. So we know the entourage effect of these other psilocybin analogs are causing neurogenesis. We know psilocybin does. We know that the receptors in the immunologically and neurologically are vast and complex. And so having just one single molecule to activate one set of receptors is a narrower field of activity than activating a broader field of multiple receptors with these psilocybin analogs. So I hope to see the day that psilocybin mushrooms in their natural form will become the preferred treatment. Standardized the markers like psilocybin and other things like baeocystin, et cetera. But once we can dial this in, I think that we can see a entourage synergistic benefit, especially with neurogenesis. When people's behaviors change biologically, neurologically, physiologically, their brains are changing. It's not like something that you just invented with the same set of neurons. You have neurogenesis that's occurring. I think psilocybin makes people smarter, wiser, more compassionate. But I think fundamentally, it changes your brain by making more synaptic connections and grows more neurons. You become smarter as a result. And so from my own personal point of view, even though I accept the conventional wisdom of a single molecule approach, I think using psilocybin mushrooms, not in a hospital room with a bunch of nurses and doctors and walls in a controlled setting. I understand that has a purpose, again, scientifically, but to be out in nature, be in contact with the cosmos, to feel and see the air as a liquid medium, to see stars and see that Betelgeuse is closer than Arcturus. The dimensionality, being thrown into the existence of nature is such an impactful experience. That's the connections that I think we all should have. And so I applaud the clinicians. I understand from the scientific method what they're doing, but I hope we can evolve to a more sophisticated set of recommendations that people do these sacred medicines in the context of nature under safe settings and safe guidelines.
Thank you, Paul. Eugenia, while we talk about the psychedelic aspects of mushrooms, there's also so much more in terms of immune support. We talked about food as medicine, of course, as immune support. And you do a lot of your work is around the microbiome, around bacteria that we carry within us, viruses which we carry within us. And obviously, there's a fungal population as well, if you will. And can you speak to that a bit, and any specific advice you might have in terms of the way we should be thinking about mushrooms in our diet, for instance?
All right. Well, first of all, I wanted to say where I am because I neglected to earlier. I'm in the east end of Long Island. I'm sticking out into the Atlantic Ocean. I'm hunkered down with my husband. Anyway, so I'm on a particular ecosystem, and my gut is another ecosystem. I mean, all the not all, but certainly laws of ecology that apply in a park setting, for example, like Yellowstone Park or like our pine forests here in the East End, are also true in your gut. So your gut is an ecosystem functioning by these laws of ecology, and they're really easy to understand if you think of what those laws of ecology are. Like what you feed is what succeeds. So if you eat a lot of sugar, then the bacteria that are living in your mouth that ferment sugar will increase in numbers, and then they'll do their side effect problems like giving you cavities. So that notion of that your body is the environment and your gut is an ecosystem, as is your skin. You are like weather. You're the environment that determines who lives and who dies, who succeeds and who fails in the whatever particular ecosystem we're talking about, like your colon. So the responsibility that we have is ultimately for ourselves, but the vector is the invisible life forms, the microbial life forms, of which fungi are one. They play a smaller role in the gut microbiome than bacteria that do, and viruses. Viruses are everywhere. They are like rogue DNA. So it's really kind of hard to find out too much about what they're doing in our guts, although they do moderate the lifestyles of bacteria, because bacteria's primary antagonists are viruses. Anyway, so we can go on and on about these interplays of different critters that live in us. It's the same as the critters in the forest or in any particular ecosystem. But the difference is what we do with our bodies affects those ecosystems, which in turn affect our health. So we're connected to the unseen world in ways that are really hard to understand, except that you'll feel the results. You'll feel the difference between when you eat really a lot of fresh foods, seasonal foods, a lot of mushrooms, and when you don't. And that there's this, the saying, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Well, it's actually works. It's true because it helps those microbes stay. They're fiber fermenters. And so eat those apples and keep those microbes present. So the connection between food and science, for me, you can't separate them. Everything is connected.
Everything is connected. Well said. For everybody that's out there, I want you to know that there are so many questions for everybody on the panel and deeper dives that people want to take, which obviously we could do a couple hours in any of those one areas. But what I would do is direct you all to the website, to fantasticfungi.com, and there is a section called ACT, where you can do a very deep dive into all of the work that we're talking about, into Paul's work, into Eugenia's work, into all of the questions that are coming up around specific health benefits. And we will endeavor to put as much as we can out there in the days ahead as to how it relates to coronavirus and everything else, because I know that is on everybody's minds. Eugenia, since you're out by the ocean, we have a question from Nicholas and Kasha, age 8 and age 4, who have tuned in. And they want to know, do mushrooms grow in the ocean?
Oh, well, there's a lot of little tiny, tiny fungi that grow in the ocean, but not really mushrooms. Most mushrooms that you see are terrestrial, although there are some that live in streams. So there are underwater mushrooms.
Okay, guys, there you go. It prompts me to mention to everybody that we also do have a very, very exciting initiative that we have launched, which is an educational version of Fantastic Fungi. Louis is in the editing room with a team of editors working on an educational version that will be available in schools, maybe even one for elementary schools. Paul will probably not share his story about stuttering and climbing the tree, but we will have the clinical research, and we envision grow kits in every classroom possible and bringing that magic and that wonder into classrooms. We also are beginning a medical and therapeutic initiative thanks to our initial funding from the Aspen Brain Institute. And we are creating a version that will be for awareness and even for training for facilitators in the medical and therapeutic field. Will be deeper dives into both of those areas. Eugenia, you mentioned something that makes me want to jump to you, Louis. You talked about making the invisible visible. I can't help but think about Louis Schwartzberg when the notion of the invisible comes up, because he has spent a career, he is the only human being I know on this planet that has spent the last 40 years, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for all of those 40 years, shooting nature in time-lapse photography and helping make the invisible visible through time and scale. And Louis, can you share a little bit about the emotion of that for you, and also maybe your process?
Yeah, well, seeing the world from the point of view of a plant, a flower, obviously it broadens your horizons, it expands your perspective. And, the same thing is true, I think, in life. When you travel, there's different languages, different cultures. We need to kind of sometimes take the blinders off. And if you can actually see the world at the metabolic rate that plants live and fungi live, then I think it is a transformational spiritual experience. It truly is. So, there are a lot of ways to get to that, feeling of the divine. Psilocybin journeys are one. Catching the perfect wave would be one. Watching time-lapse flowers open and close. The sexual organ of the plant saying, come get me, I need to, reproduce. That's also really enjoyable. As a matter of fact, I'm in LA, and I would love to show you.
Yeah, let's do it.
A frame of time-lapse work. So there are 24 frames per second when you go to a movie theater, and here we're going to capture, oh my God, look at this. The lights are on, and we're shooting 3D, the left eye and the right eye, and then the grow lights come back on. And so in about 24 hours of filming like this, we're going to end up with, 2.5 seconds of film. So what I'm doing is I'm squeezing time, and I love it. I love it because it enables us to take that journey. It's like what Tony Boss is talking about, the idea of the mystical experience. Anything that can alter our conventional, TikTok, social media crazed attitude of time is something that is healthy. I mean, during this pandemic, I'll have to admit, I am rich in time. And that is something you just can't buy.
Yeah, thank you. I should also mention to everybody that that not only is Louis' cinematography beautiful, but so is his still photography. And there is a companion book, Fantastic Fungi, that you can check out on our website that not only has beautiful imagery, but also has essays from so many of the people in the film and many other people as well. And people like extraordinary people like our great friends Alex and Allison Gray, visionary artists, and many more people. So you can check that out. And there's also another exciting initiative that is coming from the mycelial stage in fruiting, which is an album of music from great musicians that have been inspired by the film, and you'll learn more about that as time goes on. Paul, there's a question that came from Mexico, and I also want to recognize that we had an earlier Q&A today, and I want to welcome back so many of those people maybe who are joining for a second time. We had people from everywhere from Beirut to Australia, all through Europe, Chile, Argentina, Colombia, and many of those countries are represented again here in the Q&A. In addition to New Zealand, I saw, to Croatia and to Mexico. And one of the questions came from somebody in Mexico who was wondering whether in areas where they don't see many mushrooms fruiting, is there likely still a mycelial blanket under the ground? Paul, wondering about that.
Well, the mycelium is virtually throughout all terrestrial landscapes. And a great revelation that many people from Arizona had about 5 or 6 years ago. They had torrential rains in the desert, and all sorts of mushrooms suddenly started fruiting across the desert. I had dozens of people sending me photographs, and so exciting. They've never seen this before. The desert erupted in mushrooms. Now, there's not as much organic debris, obviously, in the sandy soil, so it takes longer for these mycelial networks to have their cycles of reproduction. But even though you don't see the mushrooms form, the mycelium is virtually under every footstep that you take. So the mycelium is sentient, it's everywhere. It's aware that you are walking upon it. And as you break debris and break chips of wood or sticks, the mycelium is leaping, running after you, gobbling up the debris fields that you're creating. And what's so interesting is the majority of psilocybin mushrooms follow the debris fields that humans make. And this is an extraordinarily interesting to us mycologists, is that the psilocybin mushrooms in the Pacific Northwest, an example, there's only 1 or 2 species that grows in purely old growth forests or undisturbed habitats. The vast majority of psilocybin mushrooms are associated with human activities. And it's almost as if they're purposely chasing us and following us. So we'll notice them to be able to consume them, to get the message, to be able to take care of the ecosystem better. So these are edge runners. They are at the interface between life and death, and they're on the margins of change. And I think that this metaphor that Louis makes a lot of, we are the change makers, is so true. These are the interface organisms that are the leading edge of change, and because of the endpoints of mycelium can have hundreds of nuclei in its tips, and it's a perfect place for epigenesis, for being able to code for new proteins and new solutions as the mycelium is moving after human activity to resolve some of the issues that we're creating. We're really in partnership with them.
Yeah. And speaking of change makers, Paul, we have a question from Rohana, who is a freshman in high school and wants to know any advice on what kind of educational path she could take to pursue her interest in becoming a mycologist.
Well, absolutely. Biology and botany, those are critical. I would very much encourage you to look into molecular mycology. The gene sequences that fungi are producing are some of which are not found elsewhere in nature. And there's only about 50,000 of us mycologists in the world. There's about 1.5 million species of fungi, about 150,000 mushroom-forming fungi, but we've only identified about 14,000. That means about 90% of the mushroom-forming fungi we have not yet discovered. It's an open landscape for young scientists. And as I stated before, I think the field of mycology should be as well funded as NASA. This is so instrumental and basic to our survival of not only ourselves, but our ecosystems, that we need to invest in understanding the knowledge of mycelium, the knowledge of fungi, so we can help repair the ecological devastation that we're wreaking upon the environment. Nature has a generosity of surplus. We have to be more attentive to the fact that we are borrowing that surplus from nature. It's time for us to repay back the ecosystem and engage mycelial networks to help us do so.
Beautiful. Thank you.
No, Stephen, can I jump in for a sec? I would add to Paul's, excellent recommendations that she also look into microbiology because mycology is, it kind of bridges the unseen and the seen world, because fungi tend to be microscopic, right? They're microbes, but the mushroom, the fruiting body, tends to be macroscopic. So, I'm telling you, mycology is like a gateway drug to microbiology. It's just one step before you fall into that wormhole. So I would add that to Paul's list of classes to take.
Great recommendations. Thank you for that. There are also a series of questions that are coming up from people in the psychotherapy world. And Tony Bosses, I'd like to address this to you. One of the critical bottlenecks of the use of these substances and going forward in the treatment of depression and anxiety and all the things that many people are facing today is trained therapists. And can you speak a little bit about what is available there and how that's progressing?
Yeah, thank you. So, some of the the press on the medicine has really increased the desire to learn more about it and even have access to it. Sadly, we're still in the early stages of clinical trials. There isn't a lot going on. We're beginning to have more, but we're in the early stages. As it increases, we're going to need more therapists, more trained guides to be present for these sessions. As of now, there are a few programs. I'll give a shout out to a colleague if I can. The California Institute of Integral Studies offers a 6-month program every year for licensed professionals, physicians, psychologists, chaplaincy, to go through training. But as of now, most of the training takes place within the clinical trials. So the sponsor in that university, we train our own guides for those trials. But there will come a time, I hope, relatively soon, where we'll need more trained therapists for this. I want to say one thing about tonight. Sitting here in New York City, there's an incredible parallel going on between this moment in our human story and what we see in mystical experience. Here we are all going through this incredible existential moment, and everyone is now saying what seems so obvious, that we're all connected and we're all in it together. And only by cooperation and working with each other and truly interbeing will we come out of this and survive. And that's exactly what people tell us during these mystical experiences. they say we're all connected. It's all connected. We're all in it together. And people weep during these sessions, and often they say they're weeping for all the wasted time that we do here within our species, fighting and tribalism, and when we're all in it together. So there's an incredible opportunity here in this very dark moment of receiving these lessons in a very profound way. So I just can't help but not see those two overlapping things tonight with the moment we're in and what peak experience teaches us, and what people like Tony and his experiences and the studies have shown us that we're connected truly. So,
hey Tony, I got an idea, a shortcut.
You got it.
And instead of having to go through a catastrophe to realize we're all connected, how about having a psilocybin session and just cut to the chase?
Yes, well,
we don't have to go through the suffering to figure it out.
I know, and that's we're half joking, but that's the crisis, right? It takes these traumas for humans to receive these lessons, but
yeah.
Well, maybe this is the time. This is the time for the paradigm shift. Let's change the narrative. This is our opportune time to be able to make a paradigm shift, to reprioritize the values that are important to all of us. I think we've been distracted and mesmerized by technology. As much as I love this technology today, think about how many times are you not walking in the forest? How many times are your kids not going outside? How many times are your kids not smelling soil and discovering crabs and the rocks on the beach? I think it's time for us to re-engage nature. Let's take this as a golden opportunity to reframe the narrative and change our behavior.
I agree.
You know what, Paul?
An inflection point, truly. Because materialism has kind of maxed out. Your research shows we're not happy. We're not living longer in some countries. So I agree with you. I think it's a paradigm shift, an inflection point. And yeah, Louis, you were going to go.
Well, I'm very excited that we are being supportive and like the backup singers to tons of organizations that are into permaculture and healthcare and the environment, because Paul is right. There is a movement out there. I'm looking at the chat thing. It's just remarkable. I hope that the film can be a catalyst to really galvanize all these different verticals that care about celebrating life, and this is the moment. And maybe, we've been creative with the movie. We've been creative with the distribution of the movie. We've been creative with creating the conversations around the movie. Hopefully, maybe this can just be the beginning and not the end of a mycological regeneration of let's look at everything from like square one. Look, we got to shift behavior. It's the 50th year anniversary, is coming up in a couple of weeks of Earth Day, the largest demonstration in America's history, where we said, wake up, we're going down the wrong path here. And here we are, 50 years later, and if we don't wake up, Mother Nature will make us wake up.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about what Tony said when he was talking about there were a lot of people weeping when they had their sessions. And I cried a lot too, but I cried for a different reason. I cried because I couldn't believe the power of connection to whatever it was. It was so powerful. It was so powerful that it's really unexplainable. But it allows you to let yourself go into a more spiritual place. And this place that we live in, all of our lives, there's so many distractions, so many responsibilities. You have to be accountable for everything. Unless you really work at it, it doesn't give you a way to get there. Psilocybin does that in that brief time that you're in that session. So the question is, what do we do? Well, I think we have to work harder to get there. Monks do it with meditation. There are people who do it, but we have to do it as human beings. We all have to take the time to stop and not let this world that we live in distract us so much that we can't get to know each other. We can't help each other. We can't look at each other as human beings and not the petty prejudices and biases that we have. We've got to move all that away and look at each other as we're all brothers and sisters. So if that can happen, what a world we could live in, right?
Beautifully said, Tony. Thank you for that. You know, I'm thinking back, we mentioned Alex and Allison Gray, and we had a screening there that was an overflow screening at COSM at the Chapel's Church of Sacred Mirrors. And they had overflow screenings into other rooms. And so we're in the same building with people, hundreds of people in different rooms. And we stopped for a moment during the Q&A. And rather than talking, we recognized the connection we felt with people just in another room, just separated from another room. And that was in many ways the genesis for the idea of bringing people together around the globe. And I just want to say that, you know, we have this amazing panel here today that's been speaking and answering questions and sharing from their hearts. But I want to take a moment and recognize everybody sitting in their own homes right now. And for all of us to feel that sense of connection, that sense of desire and longing that we all had to put this time aside today, to watch the film, but then to get on this Zoom and to connect with each other. And to recognize that that mycelial network is not something that we're just talking about. It is something to be felt. It is something that is present, and it is something that exists around the globe in this moment and in every moment. And we are called for that shift in consciousness. We are called for the ideals that this film holds, for Louis getting out of the way and becoming a channel for the mushrooms and for the importance of this shift in consciousness. And for us to feel that, especially in this moment of viral pandemic and what threatens us and what challenges us, but also what unites us. And with that, I want to thank each of our panelists, Louis, Paul, Tony, Eugenia, and thank everybody out there around the world for coming in to connect and for creating this matrix that exists above the ground for all of us to feel that, and to thank everybody for being part of this mycelial network. We have one more Q&A tonight in 2 hours. You can let your friends, your family, your community know about it. And if you just want to get back on and reconnect with us, we're happy to have you as well. Thank you so much, and we wish everybody a safe journey tonight and every day into the future. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.